Chapter 1. The Broken Chains. The prison camp stretched endlessly beneath a sky that felt too vast to bear. Its walls, towering and jagged, seemed to rise up from the earth like an oppressive monument to despair. These walls weren't designed to just contain bodies. They were made to crush spirits. A high, bleak tower loomed in the distance, watching over the camp with the silent judgment of a god. The dust and heat of the desert blasted into the hearts of those unfortunate enough to be imprisoned here, a constant reminder of their fate. They were forgotten. It didn't matter who they were before, what they'd fought for, or why they'd been captured. The guards didn't care. The empire that controlled this camp didn't care. The prisoners had no identity, no purpose other than to serve, to toil, and to survive, as little more than cogs in a machine of oppression. Among the hundreds of souls in this barren wasteland was Marcus, a human man. He had once been a soldier, but now he was something less, a broken man who had long since stopped believing in the possibility of salvation. His muscles were still strong, but the endurance of a soldier could only carry him so far when his will had been drained to the very core. He had fought in the uprising against the alien empire that ruled over his people, but that war was over now. The empire had won. And so, Marcus had been captured, thrown into this hellish camp where every day seemed to blur into the next. His thoughts wandered, clouded with bitterness. He had never imagined that his life would come to this, being held captive on a hostile world, forced to break his back for the amusement of cruel alien guards. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to preserve what little dignity he had left, even though he felt it slipping away. Every day, he was assigned to work in the camp's mining pits, digging for resources the aliens would later ship off to their home world. The pit was a vast, sprawling network of tunnels that wound deep into the heart of the planet. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were covered with sweat and grime from the constant effort of the prisoners. The tunnels, like the prison itself, seemed to have no end. Each shovelful of dirt he moved, each weight he lifted, took another piece of his soul with it. The pain of his body was nothing compared to the agony of his spirit, a suffering that no one in the camp could understand. As he worked, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of the years pressing on him. He had been here too long, longer than he had ever imagined surviving in this hellhole. But there was a part of him that still held on to something, the faintest hope that one day, somehow, things might change. It was a hope that had been tested time and time again, but it had never truly been extinguished. Not yet. The sound of boots echoed through the corridor, breaking his thoughts. Marcus looked up, squinting against the harsh light of the overhead lamps. The guards, dressed in their dark, intimidating armor, moved like shadows, unfeeling, uncaring. They were the overseers, the enforcers of the Empire's will, and their presence in the camp was a constant reminder of how powerless the prisoners were. As the guards passed, they tossed glances at the prisoners, their eyes cold and unflinching, a stark contrast to the desperation that clung to the men and women who labored beneath them. One of the guards, a particularly large and menacing figure, stopped for a moment near Marcus. He looked down at the human with a sneer, eyes narrowing in disdain. "You'll work harder today, Earthling, or you'll feel the consequences," the guard growled, his voice deep and menacing. Marcus didn't respond. There was no point in speaking. Every word that came out of his mouth seemed to fall on deaf ears. The guard snorted and moved on, satisfied that his intimidation had made its mark. But as the guard walked away, something caught Marcus's eye. A figure in the distance. A woman. At first, he thought it was just another prisoner, one of the countless faces that came and went in this forsaken place. But something was different about her. She stood a little straighter, her posture a bit too perfect for someone who had been through the same kind of torment as the rest of them. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back, untouched by the dirt and dust that had claimed the others. And though her face was obscured by the grime and the wear of the camp, there was something regal about her presence. Marcus couldn't quite place it, but there was an aura around her that suggested she wasn't like the rest of the prisoners. She was different. He saw her again the next day, and the day after that. She was always near the edges of the camp, never in the center where the hardest work was done. She never seemed to break a sweat, never seemed to tire. Instead, she stood there, her eyes scanning the horizon as though she was waiting for something or someone. There was a sense of quiet authority about her, something that made Marcus wonder if she wasn't a prisoner at all. Maybe she was an officer, a high-ranking figure sent by the Empire to oversee the operations of the camp. Maybe she was a spy, watching the prisoners from the shadows, collecting information. But that didn't make sense. The camp didn't allow such luxuries. Prisoners had no value beyond their labor. No, she wasn't an officer. She wasn't like the others. There was something more to her, something Marcus couldn't put his finger on. One night, when the stars above were swallowed by the endless stretch of the night sky, Marcus found himself alone in his cell, unable to sleep. The pain in his muscles was constant, gnawing at him, but it was his mind that kept him awake. The woman. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't know why, but she had become an obsession, a fleeting, enigmatic figure that hovered at the edge of his thoughts. There was something about her that felt important, but what could she possibly mean to him? She was just another prisoner, wasn't she? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but they lingered. It was then that he heard the sound, a faint scraping of metal on stone. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. He stood, pushing through the pain in his legs as he crept to the small window of his cell. What he saw left him breathless. The woman was standing by the wall, her figure hidden in the shadows, and before her was one of the guards, kneeling on the ground, his hand over his chest as though he had just been struck. She held something in her hand, something small and metallic. A weapon. But it wasn't the weapon that had Marcus's attention. It was the way she stood. The calm, almost serene look on her face as she dealt with the guard. He had never seen anyone move with such quiet confidence. It was then that it hit him. She wasn't just another prisoner. She was royalty. In that moment, Marcus realized the truth. She wasn't just some random prisoner. She wasn't like them. She was someone far more significant, someone he would have never imagined meeting in a place like this. The princess, the lost heir to a throne, hiding in plain sight. How she had ended up in the prison camp was a mystery, but one thing was clear. She was no ordinary woman. She had a past, a purpose, something greater than what this prison camp could ever provide. But what would happen now? What would Marcus do with this knowledge? He was just a prisoner, a man who had nothing left to fight for. And yet, standing there, watching the woman who held the power of an empire in her grasp, Marcus felt something stir inside him. Perhaps it was the fading embers of his humanity. Perhaps it was something else. But in that moment, he knew that his life was about to change. He didn't know it yet, but his destiny was now intertwined with hers. And so, the game began. A game of power, of survival, and of secrets. One that would change the fate of an empire. As the days dragged on, Marcus found himself watching her more intently. He still couldn't understand how she had come to be in the prison camp, but every time she moved through the yard, her presence had an undeniable effect on him. There was a quiet power about her, an energy that seemed to draw people to her without them even knowing why. The other prisoners avoided her, keeping their distance, perhaps out of respect or fear. The guards, on the other hand, treated her as if she were invisible, as if she didn't exist. But Marcus knew better. She wasn't invisible. She was something far more dangerous. One night, as he sat alone in his cell, thoughts of her flooded his mind. He wondered who she was, what she had lost, and why she was in the same prison camp as him. Why did the guards, who took pleasure in tormenting the prisoners, let her walk freely among them? They hadn't treated anyone like this before. There was something about her, something that no one dared to challenge. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, he heard a faint scraping at the bars of his cell. He froze, not sure if it was real or just a part of his imagination. The sound came again, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Marcus got to his feet, instinctively moving toward the window, peering out into the courtyard. There, in the dim light, stood the woman again. She was alone, her eyes scanning the perimeter as she moved with a grace that didn't belong in a place like this. But what struck Marcus the most was the way she seemed to glide effortlessly across the yard. It was as though she was outside the rules of the prison, a phantom, a vision of something beyond his understanding. Her movements were deliberate, her face calm and focused, but there was something more, a knowingness about her that intrigued him. She wasn't just walking through this nightmare. She was navigating it, as if she were in control of it. Marcus couldn't resist. He had to know more. Quietly, he slipped from his cell and moved into the shadows. The guards were stationed far enough away that they didn't notice his movements, and the other prisoners were too absorbed in their own misery to care. He followed the woman, keeping a careful distance as she made her way toward the far end of the camp, where the walls met the jagged rocks of the desert. He knew that this was where the guards least expected any escape attempts, far enough from the central area, but close enough to the cliff edge where there was no return. His pulse quickened as he drew nearer, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why he was doing this. It wasn't like him to get involved. He had long since stopped caring about the lives of others in this forsaken place. But there was something about her, something that made him believe that she wasn't just a prisoner. She was a key to something bigger than the prison, something that might even give him a way out. When he was within a few feet of her, she stopped abruptly. He froze, holding his breath, unsure of what she would do next. For a long moment, the woman stood still, her back to him, her gaze directed at the horizon. He thought perhaps she had sensed his presence, but then she spoke, her voice low, yet steady. "You're following me," she said without turning around. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. I didn't mean to dash." She cut him off, her tone shifting slightly. "It's all right. You're not the first to be curious." Her words, though simple, had a weight to them, a depth that made him pause. It wasn't just the fact that she had noticed him following her. It was the fact that she didn't seem angry or afraid. It was as though she expected him to be there. For the first time since entering the prison, Marcus felt a strange sense of vulnerability. But before he could say anything more, she spoke again. "You're wondering who I am, aren't you?" she asked, her voice still calm, but now tinged with a hint of something more. Marcus didn't know how to respond. She was right, of course. He had been wondering who she was, why she moved like she did, why she stood out in such a strange, intimidating way. But now, standing so close to her, he didn't feel the need to ask. It was as though he already knew, or at least, something deep within him was starting to click into place. "Yes," he said finally, the word barely escaping his lips. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if studying him. "Then you'll want to know the truth. But it's not something I can just tell you. Not yet." Marcus frowned, confused. "Why not?" She smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "Because, if I did, you would never believe me." Before he could respond, she walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the camp. Marcus stood there, rooted to the spot, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had always thought he understood the harsh, unyielding rules of the camp, the unspoken truth that everyone was a prisoner, that everyone was beneath the empire. But the woman, whoever she was, had just upended everything he thought he knew. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and questions. Every time he saw her, he tried to approach, but she always seemed to slip away before he could speak to her. The camp had never felt smaller, his life reduced to this strange, pulsing mystery that he could never quite reach. Finally, after what seemed like weeks of silence, he found her again, in the same spot near the cliffs. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was one of the camp's guards, the large, menacing one who had threatened him that day. "You're wasting your time, Earthling," the guard said as Marcus stepped into view. "The princess doesn't need your help." Marcus froze. His mind raced. "Princess?" He stared at the woman, now fully aware of the truth. She was royalty. Not just any prisoner, she was someone who mattered. And somehow, she had been here all along, hiding in plain sight. Before he could speak, the guard shoved past him, taking the princess by the arm. "Let's go, Your Highness. The Emperor's orders are clear." The words hit Marcus like a blow. The Emperor's orders? What was happening? As they disappeared into the night, the true weight of the moment settled over him. The woman wasn't just a lost prisoner, she was the daughter of the very empire that had imprisoned him. And now, for reasons he couldn't yet understand, their fates were bound together. Chapter 2. The Truth Unveiled. The camp, despite its desolation, had always been a place where the prisoners were kept separated, isolated from one another, as if to reinforce the idea that they were nothing. But Marcus had always known that there was more to the system. He had been a soldier before he understood the politics of war and power, the way people with influence could move mountains, even in the most forsaken of places. He just never imagined that the woman, the princess, was one of those people. For days after their encounter, Marcus tried to piece together what little he knew. She had been so calm, so controlled when they spoke. It was as though she knew something he didn't, something that would change everything. He had tried to track her down again, but the guards had become more vigilant, watching every move he made, as if they knew something was up. The fact that she was a princess had changed everything. He could feel it in the air, the tension that had started to grow. And that wasn't the only thing that weighed heavily on his mind. The guards had been acting differently, especially the one who had been with her. It wasn't just the way they had treated her like an equal, it was the way they now treated him with outright suspicion. It wasn't long before Marcus realized that his window of opportunity was closing, and with it, the princess's hidden world was about to be revealed. The air inside the prison camp had grown heavier, thick with secrets and silent whispers. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted since his encounter with the princess. The guards were more watchful, more oppressive. Every glance, every passing movement felt charged with an unspoken tension. It was as though the camp was no longer just a place of labor, it had become a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Marcus spent the next few days lying low, keeping to the shadows as best as he could. The more he thought about the princess, the more he realized how little he knew about her, how little he understood the scope of her existence. She had spoken of the truth, her truth, but what had she meant? Why was she hiding in a prison camp? How had she gotten here? And, most importantly, why had she not revealed herself sooner? The more questions he asked, the more his sense of clarity began to slip. The next time Marcus saw her, it was by sheer accident. He had been assigned to one of the camp's maintenance tasks, a task that involved checking the energy reserves buried beneath the foundations. As he walked along the dusty pathway that led to the old energy cells, he heard a faint voice. It was low and hushed, but the words were unmistakable. "You must be quiet, they can't know." His heart skipped a beat. He froze, his body tense, his senses alert. There, just behind a massive pile of discarded metal, stood the princess. She was speaking to someone, a figure hidden in the shadows. The voice was unfamiliar, yet Marcus felt drawn to it. He strained his ears to hear, but before he could get closer, a shadow fell over him. He turned, startled, and saw a guard standing near him. "What are you doing here, Earthling?" the guard growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. His gaze was cold, unflinching. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but immediately closed it. It was too risky. If he said anything wrong, the consequences could be severe. Instead, he nodded, his throat tight, and began walking back to his assigned duties, trying to appear nonchalant. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of the princess standing there, hidden behind the metal, speaking in whispers. That night, sleep eluded Marcus. His mind raced, each unanswered question gnawing at him. What was she planning? Why had she spoken so cryptically? And why had she come to a prison camp in the first place? It wasn't just a random choice, it was deliberate. He knew it. There was something deeper at play here. As the days passed, Marcus noticed subtle changes. The guards were less inclined to interact with him, and the princess appeared more often, though always in fleeting moments, hidden from view. Her presence was like an invisible thread weaving through the camp. Marcus's instincts told him she was plotting something, a plan he had yet to uncover, but it was coming together. He could feel it. It was on the fourth day after his last encounter with the princess that the unexpected happened. During the daily head count, the camp was thrown into chaos. Alarms blared, and guards rushed past Marcus, their heavy boots pounding against the hard ground. He had no idea what was happening, but the fear in the air was palpable. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The princess. Marcus was sure of it. She was the reason for the unrest. His heart raced as he moved toward the center of the chaos. He couldn't explain it, but a strange pull in his chest made him feel that now was the time to learn the truth. He had to get to her. But the guards were everywhere. It would be impossible to slip past them unnoticed. And yet, when the chaos reached its peak, Marcus caught a glimpse of her. Her face, still hidden behind the grime of the camp, was steely and determined. She moved with purpose, slipping past the guards, her footsteps light but deliberate. She was making her way toward the camp's most secure area, the area that housed the ancient shuttlecraft. No one was allowed near it, and yet there she was, moving toward it as if she had a right to be there. Marcus's pulse quickened. This was his chance. He had no idea what she was up to, but he had to follow her. Without thinking, he followed at a distance, his eyes darting between the guards and the princess. She was so close to the shuttle now, and Marcus had to act quickly. He approached the edge of the building, careful to stay out of sight, but his presence didn't go unnoticed for long. The moment the princess reached the shuttle, A guard turned to spot him. "Hey, what are you doing?" the guard barked, his hand reaching for his blaster. In a flash, Marcus ducked, moving faster than he ever thought possible. He ran toward the shuttle, toward the princess. The guard was shouting, his footsteps pounding behind him, but Marcus kept running. The shuttle was only a few steps away. The princess had already entered, and Marcus, with no other choice, dove into the open hatch just before the door closed behind him. He barely managed to slip inside, but he was in. The door sealed shut. He was inside the shuttle now. The princess was standing near the cockpit, her back to him. She hadn't turned when he entered, but Marcus could see that her shoulders were tense. She knew he was there. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to address this moment, but all he could do was ask the one question that had been eating away at him for days. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, his voice rough, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Why are you pretending to be just another prisoner?" She didn't respond immediately. She stared ahead, her gaze locked on the controls. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she turned to face him. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. "You're a soldier," she said quietly. "You know what it's like to be part of something bigger than yourself." Marcus nodded slowly, still unsure where this was going. She continued, "This shuttle, this mission, isn't about escape. It's about survival. My people, my empire are crumbling. They've lost the will to fight, and my family is gone. I'm the last of the royal line." Marcus was stunned. He had always assumed that the princess was simply hiding from the empire, but this was something far worse. She wasn't just running away, she was fighting for her people, for her survival. "You're here to take back your throne?" Marcus asked, finally putting the pieces together. She nodded. "Yes, but there's more. The empire didn't just imprison me because I'm royalty, they did it because they feared me. They feared what I could become. And now I need you." Marcus stared at her, stunned. He had no idea what he could offer her, no idea why she would need him, but in that moment, he understood something. This wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of rebellion, of regaining what had been lost. "I need you to help me take back what's mine," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. And that was when Marcus realized everything was about to change. For both of them. Chapter 3, A New Rebellion. The shuttle thrummed with power as the engines slowly came to life, the faint hum of the engines vibrating through the metal hull. Marcus stood at the entrance, his heart racing, trying to process the gravity of what had just been said. The princess was not only the last surviving heir of an empire, but she was also determined to take it back by any means necessary. He had followed her into the shuttle thinking he might get some answers, but now, he was being pulled into a revolution. There was no going back. But what did it mean for him? What role could a broken soldier like Marcus play in a fight of this magnitude? He had no answers. All he had was the desperation of a man who had seen his world fall apart, and now, standing on the precipice of something much bigger, he could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. The princess turned to him, her expression hard yet resolute. "We have one shot at this. If you want to walk away, now's the time." She paused, her gaze intense. "But if you stay, we're in this together." Marcus swallowed, looking out at the stars ahead. This was his chance. A chance to be part of something that could reshape the galaxy. A chance to fight once again. "I'm with you," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Let's take back what's ours." The princess gave him a small nod, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. She moved to the controls, and with a swift motion, the shuttle shot into the stars, heading toward the unknown. The fate of an empire and perhaps the galaxy itself hung in the balance. The shuttle hurtled through the starry expanse, its engines purring steadily as it drifted further away from the prison camp that had been Marcus's world for so long. The princess, who had introduced herself as Ariella, sat at the cockpit, her fingers dancing over the control panels with an expertise that surprised him. It wasn't just that she knew how to pilot the ship, it was the way she carried herself, with a calm authority that made it clear she had been raised to lead, to command. Marcus watched her for a moment, still processing the enormity of what she had asked him to do. He had joined rebellions before, fought wars in distant lands, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle against an occupying force, it was the fight for the soul of an empire. An empire that had cast Ariella aside, imprisoned her, and then forgotten her. Or worse, hoped she would disappear. "You look like you have questions," Ariella said, her voice breaking through his reverie. Marcus shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I've got more questions than answers, Ariella. But one thing's clear, we're not just fighting for the throne. We're fighting for everything the Empire stood for, everything it's become." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Exactly. And that's why it can't be just about me getting back to the throne. It's about the people who have been oppressed, the lives that have been ruined under this regime. The Empire may have fallen, but its ideals are still in the ashes. If we rebuild it with something better. Something just." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she was saying. It was about more than just her. It was about the future of the galaxy, the countless lives caught in the crossfire of a system that had long ago lost its way. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something stir inside him, hope. Hope for the future. Hope that he might still have a role in shaping it. Hours passed as they sped through the void, moving toward the location Ariella had described, an old, forgotten base where the remnants of her loyalists were gathering. It wasn't much, just a few scattered ships, a handful of soldiers, but it was a beginning. A place where they could rally support, strategize, and make their next move. When they arrived, the sight was anything but grand. The base was tucked into an asteroid belt, hidden from the prying eyes of the Empire. It was a patchwork of old ships and makeshift structures, the kind of place where fugitives and rebels made their last stand. The moment Marcus stepped off the shuttle, he could feel the tension in the air. These people had been on the run for years, living in the shadows, surviving in a world that had forgotten them. Ariella's presence brought a wave of murmurs through the crowd. She stood tall and unflinching, her eyes scanning the crowd as though she had never left. Slowly, the whispers faded, and the rebels began to gather around her, some kneeling, others standing in awe. It wasn't just her identity as a princess that captivated them. It was the hope she represented, the possibility of a new beginning. One man, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face, stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough but respectful. "We've been waiting for you." Ariella nodded, her voice firm. "We've all been waiting for this moment. It's time to end the Empire's tyranny. But we can't do it alone. We need every fighter, every ally we can gather. It's going to take more than just a few loyal soldiers to bring them down." Marcus stepped forward then, his voice loud and clear. "I've seen how the Empire treats those it deems beneath them," he said, his gaze sweeping over the gathered rebels. "I've fought their wars, bled for their cause. But I'm done with it. This is where we take back what's ours. This is where we start a rebellion that can't be silenced." The crowd erupted into cheers. It wasn't just the words that rallied them, it was the spirit of rebellion, the spark that had been ignited by Ariella's return. The fire that had long been smothered was now burning bright. Chapter 4: The Empire Strikes Back. The rebellion grew quickly, its flames spreading as word of Ariella's return to power swept across the galaxy. Loyalists, sympathizers, and even former soldiers of the Empire flocked to their banner. It wasn't just her claim to the throne that drew them in, it was her promise of something more. A new empire, one built on fairness, equality, and freedom. A system that would no longer oppress the innocent for the sake of power. Marcus, once a lone soldier adrift in the ruins of his own despair, now found himself at the forefront of this movement. The fight was far from easy, and the Empire wasn't about to go down without a fight. They sent fleets of warships to crush the rebellion, deploy their best soldiers, and put an end to the uprising. The battle for the stars had begun. For every victory the rebels won, the Empire struck back with greater force. But Ariella was relentless. She knew the Empire's weaknesses, their flaws, their hubris. She used every scrap of knowledge she had gathered over the years in exile to outmaneuver them, to strike at their heart. Marcus fought at her side, leading squads of soldiers on daring missions to sabotage supply lines, to destroy Imperial outposts, and to free captured civilians. But it was the final battle that would decide everything. The rebellion had managed to assemble a fleet of their own, a ragtag force of stolen ships and refurbished war vessels. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take on the Empire's flagship, the Emperor's Wrath, a massive vessel that had been the symbol of the Empire's might for centuries. Ariella stood in the command center of their flagship, staring out at the fleet as it prepared for the assault. Marcus stood beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle ahead would be brutal. They knew that, but it was their only chance. "I can't promise you we'll win this," Ariella said, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "But I promise you, we will fight with everything we have. We'll make them regret ever thinking they could crush us." Marcus nodded, his gaze unwavering. "We're with you, Your Highness. To the end." The battle was fierce. The sky was filled with explosions, the roar of weapons firing, and the screams of dying soldiers. For hours, the rebellion fought tooth and nail, pushing against the overwhelming might of the Empire's fleet. But slowly, the tide began to turn. Ariella's strategic genius, combined with the bravery of her soldiers, started to break through the Imperial defenses. The Emperor's wrath was no longer untouchable. Finally, with one final push, Marcus and Ariella's forces breached the enemy's shields, allowing their flagship to deliver the killing blow. The Emperor's wrath exploded in a fiery blaze, its once proud form reduced to nothing but debris in the vacuum of space. The war was over. The Empire had fallen. Ariella stood on the bridge of their ship, her eyes fixed on the wreckage of the Imperial flagship. She had reclaimed her throne. But more than that, she had reclaimed her destiny. The galaxy was no longer shackled by the Empire's cruel reign. Marcus stood beside her, his heart light for the first time in years. He had fought countless battles, seen countless lives lost, but in this moment, he knew that they had done it. They had won. They had forged a future where justice would reign. And as the stars shone brightly ahead of them, Marcus realized that the rebellion had not just been about fighting for a throne. It had been about fighting for freedom, freedom from tyranny, freedom for every soul who had been crushed by the Empire's rule. With Ariella as the new empress, and the rebellion now a beacon of hope across the galaxy, they would rebuild. And this time, it would be a world where no one would ever have to fight for their freedom again. The galaxy had been saved, not by kings and queens, but by rebels, by those who dared to defy the impossible.